Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to a place where conversations float through the air like birdsong, where words can soar across deep ravines and vanish into the mist. You've arrived in the Canary Islands, specifically on the rugged Isle of Gomera. Here the cliffs are steep, the trails are narrow, and the language, well, it whistles. You stand at the edge of a craggy overlook, waves crashing below, when a sharp melodic trill cuts through the salt-scented wind. You glance around, no one in sight. Another series of notes spirals through the air, rising and falling in pitch. It's not random. Someone's speaking. Of course, you probably won't survive this journey if you expect to rely on your phone signal. The locals here have been communicating across impossible distances for centuries, without cables, without radios, and long before satellites. They do it with their mouths and fingers alone, using an ancient whistled language called Silbo Gomero. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The island greets you like an old friend who enjoys a bit of a prank. One moment the path beneath your feet is dry and sun-baked. The next, a dense mist swirls in from the Atlantic, curling between the palm trunks and making everything damp and mysterious. They call it bruma. To you, it feels like walking through a dream. You make your way down a narrow path, guided by a local named Miguel, short, wiry, with a grin that suggests he knows more than he lets on. "Listen," he says, suddenly stopping. At first, you hear only the rustling of leaves. Then a piercing series of tones burst from the fog, echoing off the walls of the ravine below. It rises and falls, structured and deliberate. "That's Silbo," Miguel says. "Two farmers across the gorge. Talking about goats maybe, or gossip." He winks. You learn that this is not just playful noise. Silbo Gomero is a full language capable of expressing any sentence you could say in Spanish. It's compressed, of course, relying on pitch and timing instead of consonants and vowels. But here on La Gomera, it once served as the primary means of long-distance communication. As you climb higher into the terraced hills, you meet Maria, an elderly woman who remembers when Silbo was everywhere. "When I was young," she tells you, "the hills sang all day. You knew who was where and what they wanted just by listening." Historians still argue whether Silbo evolved from an indigenous Guanche tongue or adapted entirely from Spanish after conquest. What's certain is that it became the island's lifeline. In a place where cliffs and gorges often separate villages by hours of walking, a well-placed whistle can bridge miles in an instant. By late afternoon, you find yourself sitting in a cafe perched above a ravine. Below, wisps of fog snake through the valley. Another whistle floats up, playful, insistent. That one, Miguel says, chuckling, means someone's inviting a neighbor for coffee. You sip your drink and smile. Who needs Wi-Fi when the wind carries your words? The mist thickens as twilight approaches, wrapping the island in a silvery hush. You follow Miguel through cobbled alleys in San Sebastian, La Gomera's capital, where the whitewashed walls gleam softly in the fading light. Your destination tonight, an old community center, where several elders are gathering for their weekly storytelling evening, though here, storytelling often involves more than words. Inside, the air is warm with the scent of old wood and gofio, a toasted grain flour the locals seem to sprinkle on just about everything. You settle into a creaky chair as the room fills with neighbors, many well into their 70s and 80s. A battered thermos of local wine appears, and with it, the stories begin. It's here you hear for the first time how many Gomerans first learned about Silbo, not as an academic curiosity, but as a fact of life. Carmen, her hair coiled in a neat bun, leans forward. "I was 7, she says, voice steady. "We lived in a gulo high up. My brother would whistle to tell my mother when he was bringing firewood down the mountain." She smiles faintly. "One day a stranger's whistle reached us. Different pattern. Urgent. My mother knew straight away someone had fallen. She packed supplies and ran. Without Silbo, we'd have never known." Another elder, Jose, grins. "I learned it from the goats." The room chuckles. "Well, because my father whistled to call them, and I imitated him. Later, he taught me real Silbo." His eyes twinkle. "Goats understand some of it too, you know." Historians still argue whether the first structured use of Silbo dates to pre-conquest Guanche tribes or arose later among Spanish-speaking settlers adapting to the terrain. But everyone here agrees it was never invented. It simply was as natural as the wind. You sip the earthy wine, letting the rhythms of their words and occasional bursts of whistled phrases wash over you. In this room, the line between speech and song blurs. A sharp, rising whistle rings out. One of the men grins. She's asking if the wine's finished, he translates. Laughter ripples through the group. As the night deepens, Carmen leans toward you. You'll hear more tomorrow, she says softly. Go to the high paths. That's where Silbo lives. You step back into the cool night air as newly attuned. Even through the thick mist, a faint fluted call weaves through the silence, an ancient voice still echoing across the island. Morning greets you with clear skies and crisp air, a rare treat, Miguel tells you. Perfect day to hear the hills talk. You lace up your shoes and follow him out of San Sebastian up winding roads carved into the volcanic spine of the island. La Gomera is not a flat land of beaches and boulevards. It is a world of vertiginous ravines, deep gullies called barrancos that cut through the island like scars. Even the most direct route between two villages often involves climbing steep trails, zigzagging across switchbacks, and descending again. You soon understand why the islanders embraced whistling. Words shouted across such distances would scatter like leaves in the wind, but a well-placed whistle that pierces through. Miguel leads you to a narrow path flanked by terraces, stone walls built generations ago to tame the slopes for farming. These terraces, he explains, held bananas, tomatoes, potatoes. But the land separated families. You couldn't just walk across a barranco. As you pause for water, he cups his hands and sends a whistle arcing over the gorge. It echoes sharply, a haunting sound that seems to defy gravity. Moments later, a reply comes clear and deliberate. That, he says, grinning, is Old Man Ramos, still tending goats over there. We just said good morning. You sit for a while watching the sun climb higher. The barrancos may look picturesque, but they shaped life here in profound ways. Silbo Gomero arose not from whimsy, but from necessity. Farmers needed to coordinate planting and harvests. Families separated by geography needed to share news. Emergencies demanded instant communication. Historians still argue whether the Guanches, the island's pre-Hispanic inhabitants, had a whistling language of their own. Some believe traces of that tongue survive in Silbo's intonations. Others argue that today's Silbo evolved entirely from Spanish after the conquest. The truth, like many things here, lies hidden in the folds of time. Miguel hands you a small field notebook. Inside, a chart showing basic Silbo phrases. Hello, help, danger, come home. Practice, he says. You'll need it later. As the day warms, the path steepens. Your legs protest, but your ears stay alert. Now you hear them everywhere, thin threads of sound weaving across the ravines, conversations warning simple greetings. The island hums with invisible voices. By the time you reach the next village, the sun hangs low, casting long shadows. A final whistle rises from the opposite ridge, playful, warm, familiar. Miguel smiles. That's my cousin. He says dinner's ready. You grin. On La Gomera, it seems even supper comes by air. You wake to a dawn chorus unlike any you've heard before. Birds, yes, but threaded between their calls are crisp human whistles, rising and falling with practiced grace. From your window, the stone terraces of the village stair-step into the mist, each layer carrying whispers through the air. At breakfast, Miguel explains the fundamentals of Silbo Gomero. It's not just random notes, he says, over thick slices of pan con tomate. It maps directly onto spoken Spanish. This surprises you. You'd imagine Silbo as a simple code, perhaps just a handful of signals. But no, what the locals wield is a linguistic art form. Spanish has 5 vowels and around 20 consonants. Silbo reduces these to variations in pitch, length, and pattern. A skilled whistler can reproduce every sentence you could say aloud. Miguel demonstrates. He whistles a phrase across the room. An elderly woman responds without missing a beat. When you ask what was said, Miguel grins. I told her, you're new here, and she said, welcome. The technique itself is mesmerizing. Some use fingers pressed to their mouths, amplifying the sound. Others whistle purely with lips and tongue, an approach that requires years to master. Historians still argue how standardized Silbo truly is. Some scholars suggest its structure varies subtly from village to village, much like regional accents. Others claim modern schooling has unified it. Either way, it remains an extraordinary system, a spoken language reborn in sound. Later, you visit a local school where children learn Silbo as part of their curriculum. In a sunny classroom, kids as young as 8 practice sending messages across the courtyard. The teacher, Senora Ruiz, beams with pride. We teach it so they remember where they come from, she says. It is part of our soul. You watch as a boy whistles a long, intricate sentence. Moments later, another child crouched behind a pillar whistles back a perfect reply. It's like magic, you whisper. Senora Ruiz smiles. No magic, just ears and breath. As you leave the school, the air seems charged. You realize you've begun listening differently, attuned to subtle shifts in the wind. On La Gomera, silence is never truly silent. Somewhere always a message sails invisibly by. The sun arcs higher as you follow a narrow trail into the island's interior. The landscape shifts, dense laurel forests give way to rocky outcrops, their surfaces scorched and gleaming. The path winds like a lazy river, and every so often a sudden trill of whistles punctuates the air. Miguel leads the way, pausing at a lookout. Here, he says, is where Silbo saved lives. He gestures to a series of steep ravines slicing the landscape. Imagine heavy rains, he says. The barrancos flood fast, no time to run. In centuries past, spotters stationed high above would whistle warnings to the farmers below. One phrase could clear a valley in minutes. You lean against a sun-warmed stone, imagining it torrents of water-panicked goats, farmers sprinting uphill at a whistle's command. The language carried urgency with perfect efficiency, but Silbo wasn't used only in disaster. High-stakes communication shaped daily life. Shepherds managed flocks scattered across impossible terrain, coordinating with whistles too distant for voice. Merchants organized deliveries without setting foot beyond their villages. Miguel tells one story in particular. Years ago, a fire broke out in a remote banana plantation. The workers couldn't see the flames through the gorges, but one sharp whistle raced down the slopes. The plantation was saved, he says, because someone's grandfather knew the right call. Historians still argue about the origins of specific Silbo phrases. Some swear by patterns passed down orally for generations. Others believe modern Spanish dominates the system now, but no one questions its effectiveness. You continue onward, reaching a flat ridge where the breeze carries sound like a silver thread. Miguel cups his hands and whistles a long, undulating call. Moments later, a sharp two-note reply echoes from far below. That, he says, is Juan. He's guarding sheep today. Miguel chuckles, and telling us to bring wine next time. You smile, thinking how entire conversations can unfold on the wind. Here on this island where cliffs divide and isolate, Silbo turned air into a bridge. As the sun dips lower, casting golden light across the peaks, a final whistle drifts past, a farewell, a promise, or perhaps just a simple good night. On La Gomera, it could be all three. The next morning dawns bright and still. The wind rests and the island feels momentarily hushed, as if it too remembers. Miguel meets you in the plaza holding an old book. Time to learn what nearly silenced Silbo, he says. You settle at a sun-dappled table while he unfolds a story of conquest and change. In 1402, Spanish forces began their push into the Canary Islands. Fierce battles raged, none fiercer than on La Gomera. The indigenous Guanches, skilled in stone and wood, but not steel, fought bravely. Some oral histories suggest they used whistling to coordinate ambushes across the treacherous terrain. Historians still argue whether Silbo as we know it descends from these Guanche battle calls or emerged later adapted to the Spanish tongue. The truth is veiled, like much of La Gomera's past, in mist and myth. When the conquest ended, life shifted. Spanish lords imposed new rule. The Guanche language and customs faced brutal suppression. Entire cultural threads unraveled. And yet Silbo remained. Miguel taps the book. Why? Because it was useful. The new rulers relied on locals to manage farms, herds, and messages. On an island where cliffs swallowed, shouted words, whistles endured. But there were shadows too. Colonial officials sometimes banned Silbo in official settings, fearing secret plots. They didn't like a language they couldn't control, Miguel says. Still in markets, on mountain trails, and in vineyard rows, Silbo slipped through the cracks. Farmers passed it to their children in the fields. Lovers shared coded calls beneath watchful eyes. Smugglers, while they found their own uses. You stroll through the old quarter of San Sebastian. Narrow lanes twist between ochre walls, their stones worn smooth by time. Overhead, a lone whistle arcs from rooftop to rooftop, soft, fleeting, alive. Miguel smiles. That sound survived kings' wars and bans, he says. Not bad for a language made of air. As evening falls, you climb a hillside path. The town glows below, lanterns flickering like stars. Another whistle carries on the night breeze, not defiant, not mournful. Simply here. In that fragile melody, you hear resilience and hope. Morning mist clings to the hills as you follow a winding trail into La Gomera's quieter heart. Miguel walks beside you carrying a small woven satchel. Now, he says, we'll visit those who kept Silbo alive when few dared to use it. You climb higher, leaving the tourist paths behind. The forest thickens, twisting laurel branches form a living tunnel, their leaves glistening. Here, centuries seem to gather like dew. In a small hamlet clinging to the edge of a ravine, you meet Rosa, a wiry woman with a gaze both sharp and kind. Over herbal tea, she tells her story. I was a girl during hard times, she begins. My father was a farmer. My mother, she could whistle as well as any man. She smiles. But we were taught not to do it in town. The officials frowned upon it, said it was uncivilized. Even some neighbors called it backward. And yet beyond the prying eyes of authority, Silbo thrived. We used it in the hills, Rosa continues, to warn of inspectors to call the children to send love when words were forbidden. She demonstrates a high lilting phrase that floats effortlessly across the ravine. Miguel grins. She just told her cousin we've arrived. Historians still argue how close Silbo came to extinction. In the mid-20th century, as radios and phones reached the island, many saw no need to teach it. Combined with social stigma, this nearly silenced the language. But in these hidden communities, nestled among stone terraces and winding goat paths, tradition held fast. Grandparents taught grandchildren. Messages flew between mountain fields long after modern voices fell silent. Rosa takes you to a crumbling stone outpost overlooking the valley. My grandfather's spot, she says softly. From here, he watched for smoke and whistled warnings. A chill runs down your spine. You can almost hear echoes of those long-ago calls. As you prepare to leave, Rosa grips your hand. Remember, she says Silbo is not only sound, it is memory. You step back onto the path, ears newly open. Somewhere ahead, a faint whistle rises, timeless, persistent, and proud. The next day, curiosity leads you deeper. How does a mouth become an instrument? How can breath and flesh replace a full alphabet? Miguel promises answers and a teacher. You meet Luis at a sun-bleached overlook, wind tugging at his worn hat. He's a retired shepherd, wiry as the cliffs themselves. His handshake is firm, his smile easy. No better classroom than this, he says, gesturing to the yawning ravine below. Sound carries far here across rock and air. Luis begins with the basics posture. You stand tall, shoulders relaxed. He demonstrates shaping his mouth into a tight O fingers, angled precisely to amplify the sound. The first whistle bursts forth, sharp, clear, and loud enough to startle a nearby crow. Now you, he says. You try. The result is unimpressive, a damp puff of air. Luis chuckles. Don't force it. Breath must flow, not fight. Historians still argue which techniques yield the purest tone. Some claim using fingers in the mouth produces greater range. Others prefer lip-only methods for subtlety. Luis teaches both. He explains that vowels in Silbo translate to distinct pitch levels, while consonants rely on breaks, modulations, and rhythm. The language compresses complex phrases into musical signatures, a kind of linguistic Morse code. You practice for an hour, your lips ache, your fingers feel clumsy. But when at last a faint two-tone whistle escapes your mouth, Luis beams. There the mountain heard you. As you rest, Luis shares stories. When I heard it goat, Silbo was my radio. Rain coming whistle, lost kid whistle, hungry whistle twice. He grins. And once to propose to my wife. You arch an eyebrow. He laughs. She whistled yes. The sun dips lower. Across the ravine, Luis whistles a long phrase. After a pause, a distant reply answers. She's saying dinner's ready, he translates, eyes twinkling. As you part ways, you glance back. Luis stands silhouetted against the sky, shaping breath into words older than memory. You realize this is no mere skill. It is an art, a fragile one carried on the wind. By now, your ears catch every stray whistle in the air, some conversational, some playful, some so fast they feel like birds in flight. But how does a language this rare survive into an age of smartphones and text messages? Miguel leads you to a bright modern school nestled among the terrace slopes. Inside, sunlight spills through open windows as a small group of students, no older than 10, prepare for their next lesson. Their teacher, Elena, greets you warmly. Welcome to Silbo class, she says. We start young here, so they'll always carry it. You watch as the students practice. They line up by the window, fingers poised. Elena calls out phrases in Spanish which the children must translate and whistle to classmates standing outside in the courtyard. The results are astonishing, crisp, confident tones sail across the schoolyard. Replies come just as fast. One boy grins and whispers, "She asked if I like her." The whole group giggles. Elena explains the stakes. By the 1990s, Silbo was nearly gone, she says. Parents didn't teach it. Why would they, with phones everywhere? Local government and passionate linguists fought to preserve it, pushing for it to be taught in schools. Historians still argue how faithfully today's taught version matches the old shepherd's Silbo. Some say the modern curriculum smooths out regional quirks. Others argue that without this formal teaching, the language would vanish entirely. Elena invites you to try. You step nervously to the window, fingers in place, breath steady. The first attempt flops, barely a whisper. The children cheer anyway. A second try, a wavering, rising tone. A boy outside cups his ear and grins. He whistles back. Try again, you laugh. Even at your worst, Silbo connects. By day's end, you're exhausted but enchanted. The children file out, chattering and whistling. You catch one phrase, see you tomorrow. The sound lingers like sunlight. Later, as you walk the quiet lanes, a single whistle drifts past. You smile. The island is teaching you to listen and to speak in a new old way. The days settle into a gentle rhythm, hiking, listening, learning. By now, your ears anticipate the whistles before your mind does the air itself, seeming to hum with meaning. Over coffee one morning, you ask Miguel about Silbo's roots. How old is it really, you wonder? He leans back, considering. Historians still argue about that, he says, eyes twinkling. But the truth may be older than any of us can prove. The prevailing theory holds that modern Silbo maps onto Spanish. But deep in La Gomera's past, before the Spanish conquest, the indigenous Guanche people spoke their own language, one that left few written traces. Some scholars suggest the Guanches had a whistled mode of speech long before Europeans arrived. Others believe Silbo emerged entirely after the conquest, shaped by the need to communicate Spanish across impossible terrain. You'll hear both stories, Miguel says. In the old villages, they say it's always been here. He introduces you to Don Andres, a local historian. Over the course of an afternoon spent paging through brittle documents and tracing faded maps, Don Andres explains the puzzle. Guanche words appear in old place names and oral histories. Some of the rhythmic patterns in Silbo do not match Spanish prosody, perfectly subtle hints, perhaps, of an earlier tongue beneath the modern structure. Is it proof, Don Andres asks, raising an eyebrow? No. But listen closely. You may hear the echoes. Later, you climb a high ridge alone, the air thin and clear. A shepherd's whistle rings out, pure, steady, ancient. For a moment, you can almost believe it carries a message older than memory. You whistle back, clumsy, hopeful. A brief silence follows, then a soft trill in reply. Welcome, it says. You are part of the conversation now. As dusk falls, the island whispers around you, its language layered with centuries. Spanish, Guanche, human breath, all born on the wind. Your next stop is a shaded plaza where older Gomerans gather to chat, and more often than not to whistle. You sit beneath a sprawling fig tree as conversation swirls around you, spoken and sung through the air. Miguel gestures toward one white-haired man whistling softly between sips of coffee. That's Eusebio. He knows things. You approach and Eusebio smiles. You want the old stories, he says. Sit. With a voice weathered by sun and salt, he begins. Before the Spanish came, the Guanches ruled these lands. They spoke words the wind still remembers. He describes ancient ceremonies where whistle calls summon distant clans. Hunters, he claims, used Silbo-like signals to coordinate across ravines. And during the bitter days of conquest, those same tones warned of approaching ships. Historians still argue, he says with a shrug. Did they have a full whistled language? No one can prove. But the Guanche spirit, it sings through Silbo still. He demonstrates sending a slow, haunting phrase skyward. You shiver. Even without knowing the meaning, the sound stirs something primal. Later, in a dusty library, you comb through research. Linguists debate whether today's Silbo contains phonetic echoes of Guanche words, or whether its melody merely evokes the lost tongue. One tantalizing clue: Guanche speech was known for rhythmic intonation. Some believe Silbo's cadences preserve that ancient musicality, even if the exact vocabulary is gone. As you close a cracked volume, the late sun slants through the window. Outside, a child whistles a bright, laughing call. The sound loops through the air, connecting past to present. You step into the plaza once more. Eusebio raises a hand and whistles a soft farewell. This time, without thinking, you reply awkwardly and perfectly. His grin widens. Good, he says. Now you speak the language of ghosts. And with that, he turns the last notes of his whistle, lingering like smoke. You rise early the next morning, drawn towards sound itself. Miguel promised today's lesson would involve no words, only listening. He leads you into one of La Gomera's most dramatic landscapes, a labyrinth of towering ravines carved by millennia of wind and water. Here, nature sculpts sound into something almost alive. This is where Silbo breathes best, Miguel says. The path twists downward. Cliffs loom on either side, their faces etched with cracks and ledges. You pause often, testing the air. Every faint whistle rebounds with startling clarity, first once, then twice, then seeming to swirl around you. Miguel explains, the shape of these barrancos creates natural amplifiers. Whistles carry for kilometers if you know where to stand. He demonstrates positioning himself just so on a narrow outcrop. His whistle arcs high and true, vanishing into the gorge. Seconds later, an answering call returns not from the origin point, but from a side canyon. It bounces, Miguel says. You must learn to hear not just the sound, but its path. Historians still argue about whether ancient Gomerans consciously mapped these acoustic sweet spots. Some believe the locations were passed down orally. Others think shepherds and farmers discovered them by trial and error. Either way, the effect is mesmerizing. You try next. Standing on a crumbling ledge, you shape your mouth and release a tentative whistle. The reply comes clearer than expected. A grin spreads across your face. Miguel laughs. Now you're hooked. As the day unfolds, you move from ridge to ridge, ears tuned to the ravine's song. Some spots sharpen the tone like crystal. Others muffle it into a whisper. You begin to grasp why Silbo developed here and why no phone or radio can quite replace it. Later, beneath a natural stone arch, you sit in silence. A single plaintive whistle drifts through the fading light, an ancient voice moving through stone and sky. You close your eyes, letting the sound wash over you. In this place of echoes, language becomes pure vibration, a bridge of breath and time. Evening settles over the island in a velvet hush. You wander the narrow lanes of a hillside village where every stone seems to hold a story. Lanterns flicker, shadows stretch long. Somewhere above a whistle flits through the dark, soft, secretive. Miguel appears beside you, a conspiratorial grin on his face, ready for the most human use of Silbo. You follow him into a courtyard where a trio of elders sip sweet wine. They chuckle when they see you. He's going to tell about the lovers, one says, eyes twinkling. And so Miguel begins. In the old days, he says, many young people couldn't meet freely. Parents watched, priests preached, especially about marriage. He sips his wine, but Silbo gave them wings. You listen enchanted as he recounts tales of clandestine romance. A young woman on one side of the barranco, a young man on the other. Parents indoors oblivious. And at twilight beneath the stars, messages sent on the wind. Too short, one long, Miguel says, meant I'm here. A descending trill meant I love you. And if danger approached, a single sharp call. Historians still argue how widespread this coded courtship truly was. Some claim it flourished mainly in remote hamlets. Others insist it was an island-wide art. What's clear is that many a marriage began with a whistle. One elder leans in. My grandfather, he says, proudly wooed my grandmother this way. They whistled each night for months. First words were spoken only on their wedding day. You try to imagine it, heart's racing breath held as messages danced through the dark. In an age before texts and calls, love rode the wind. As the moon climbs higher, Miguel teaches you a few of these phrases. You practice shyly, sending a tentative hello across the courtyard. The elders cheer. Later, walking back beneath a sky strewn with stars, you hear it again, a faint rising call answered moments later from across the gorge. Somewhere out there, two souls are still speaking a language older than law, newer than longing. You smile. On La Gomera, love still whistles through the night. By now, the island hums beneath your skin. Each ravine seems alive with invisible threads, each stone terrace an unwritten page. But Silbo's history, Miguel reminds you, isn't all love notes and friendly greetings. Come, he says one morning. Time for the darker tales. You climb to a weathered lookout once used by guards and smugglers alike. Below, a forgotten path twists toward the sea, an old smuggling route. The Atlantic gleams beyond, as if in on the secret. Miguel begins. During hard times war embargo dictatorship, Silbo served another role. He tells of lean years when basic goods were scarce, when islanders relied on clandestine networks to survive. Ships brought supplies in the dark, but getting them inland, that was dangerous. Official patrols watched the ports, but the cliffs belonged to the locals. Silbo became the smuggler's voice. Warnings flashed across gorges faster than any runner. One call for a safe path, Miguel says. Two for guards ahead, three sharp notes, stop, scatter. Historians still argue about how organized these networks were. Some say isolated families acted alone. Others suggest a loose island-wide system. Whatever the truth, Silbo played its part. Miguel recounts a legendary tale during a crackdown. One smuggler's son, barely 12, used Silbo to warn a caravan. His message, fluted through the night, saved lives and livelihoods. But the language wasn't limited to contraband. During the Spanish Civil War, Silbo sometimes carried news censored elsewhere. Whistles in the hills whispered of battles won or lost, of prisoners taken, of hope flickering. Miguel sighs. It wasn't always safe. Speaking through Silbo could mean prison, or worse. You gaze down at the twisting paths, imagining figures darting through moonlight breath, shaping sound into shield and sword. Even today, Miguel says some elders hesitate to teach certain phrases. The past is close here, too close sometimes. As you descend, a single sharp whistle pierces the air. A local child playing perhaps, or an echo of older warnings. You glance back once the wind cool on your face. On La Gomera, even shadows speak. Days pass in a gentle blur, hiking sunlit paths, listening for unseen conversations in the air. Yet one question lingers: how did Silbo survive the onslaught of modern life? Miguel senses your curiosity. One crisp morning, he leads you to the town hall of Alahermoso. Inside, a wall of old photographs greets you. Black and white faces, weathered hands, eyes that seem to know. This is where the revival began, he says. By the 1970s, Silbo was fading fast. Radios and phones had conquered the gorges. Younger generations saw no need to learn what they deemed an old man's trick. Parents, wary of stigma, stopped teaching it. By then, Miguel says softly, only a handful of masters remain. Historians still argue about the precise moment of Silbo's rebirth. Some point to a single school teacher's efforts. Others credit a grassroots movement. What's certain is this: by the late 20th century, the language stood on a precipice. Enter a band of passionate locals, teachers, historians, linguists, even musicians. They fought to preserve Silbo, lobbying for its inclusion in school curricula. Their argument was simple yet powerful. Silbo was not a curiosity, it was culture, identity, memory. Their efforts bore fruit. In 1999, the Canary Islands government made Silbo instruction mandatory in La Gomera's schools. Teachers trained elders, shared children, listened and learned. Miguel's eyes shine. Now every child here learns Silbo. It breathes again. You visit a modern classroom where this revival lives. A teenage girl steps forward, poised and confident. With practiced grace, she whistles a complex phrase across the auditorium. The reply, a perfect echo, comes from her grinning friend. You applaud with the rest. In that moment, the line between past and present blurs. Later at a small cafe, Miguel reflects. Without the revival, he says, Silbo would have vanished. The hills would be silent. You sip your coffee listening. Beyond the bustle of the plaza, a lone whistle floats by, soft, sure, alive. The revival worked. The island sings once more. The next morning, clouds drift lazily across a blue sky as Miguel greets you with a mischievous smile. Today, he says, you meet the future of Silbo. You follow him to a bright modern building tucked between ancient stone houses, a language lab of all things. Inside, sleek screens hum softly alongside dusty tomes and weathered recording equipment. At the center of this curious blend of past and present stands Dr. Isabel Moran, a linguist with silver-streaked hair and a twinkle in her eye. Welcome, she says warmly. You're just in time, we're digitizing the wind. She gestures to a glass-walled booth where an elder stands, fingers poised. A technician nods and the whistling begins, clear, rich, soaring. These, Dr. Moran explains, are archival recordings. We capture every nuance, pitch, timing breaks. The goal to build a digital library of Silbo Gomero, preserving it for future generations and for scientific study. Historians still argue about whether digitization can truly preserve a language so rooted in breath and landscape. Some fear that recorded whistles lack the soul of live exchange. Others embrace the project as a vital safeguard. We walk a fine line, Dr. Moran admits. But without this work, the risk of loss remains. She shows you spectrograms, visual maps of sound. Silbo's curves and spikes look almost like calligraphy. Each whistler has a signature, she says. You can see personality in the waves. You marvel as phrases flicker across the screen, greetings, warnings, love notes, jokes, a living language caught in digital amber. Later, Miguel hands you a small device. Many here now use these apps to learn, he says. Indeed, young Gomerans practice Silbo through interactive games, blending ancient skill with modern tech. As you leave, a thought strikes you, even as phones and satellites shrink the world. La Gomera's language of the air endures, adapted, evolving, alive. That night, high on a ridge, you try your own whistle once more. The reply comes not from an app or archive, but from a distant hill where breath still carries meaning on the wind. Night descends like velvet over La Gomera, the stars sharp and near. Tonight, Miguel promises something special, a Silbo contest beneath the open sky. You follow winding lanes to a terraced amphitheater carved into the hillside. Lanterns glow softly and the crowd murmurs with quiet anticipation. The air hums not with engines or music, but with the thrill of voices soon to take flight. This, Miguel explains, is part sport, part art, and entirely ours. The contest begins with an invocation, a master whistler sending a long, undulating phrase across the darkened ravine. The crowd listens rapt as echoes swirl back like liquid silver. Then the competitors take the stage, young and old men and women. Each faces challenges drawn at random, translating complex sentences, improvising responses, even recreating ancient phrases from archival recordings. You watch spellbound as one young woman whistles a weather report with dazzling clarity. Another contestant sends a witty retort to a mock insult, earning laughter and cheers. Judges seated with practiced ears evaluate every note. Accuracy matters, but so does tone, breath control, and artistry. Historians still argue whether such contests mirror the spirit of traditional Silbo. Some worry about over-formalizing a language born of necessity and intimacy. Others embrace these events as celebrations, a vital way to keep the skill alive. Between rounds, Miguel introduces you to an elder judge. When I was a boy, the man says Silbo meant news urgent every day. Now it is also pride. As the final round approaches, tension hums in the cool night air. The last two competitors stand ready. The phrase drawn is tricky, part proverb, part riddle. Breath held, the first contestant whistles, fluid sure. The reply comes swift and playful, earning a wave of applause. You find yourself grinning. Here, beneath ancient stars, a language of wind, and will dances once more. Later, as lanterns dim and the crowd disperses, Miguel claps your shoulder. Now you've truly heard Silbo, he says. Above a final lone whistle pierces the night victory farewell and timeless echo all in one. The morning after the contest, Gomera feels different somehow, lighter, more connected. You sip coffee in a sunlit plaza as locals drift by, exchanging greetings in both voice and whistle. The language of the air is everywhere once you know how to hear it. Miguel joins you, eyes bright. Now you see, he says Silbo is not only words, it is who we are. Across the island, Silbo has become a proud emblem of Gomeran identity. From shop signs to festival banners, its presence hums beneath daily life. Tourists marvel, locals preserve. The revival has rekindled more than language, it has sparked belonging. Miguel takes you to a small cultural center where artisans craft everything from pottery to song. Here, Silbo themes echo through paintings, jewelry, even lullabies. A young artist shows you her work, a swirling mural of ravines and rising notes. Silbo connects us, she says, to each other, to our land. Historians still argue whether such cultural branding risks diluting Silbo's true nature. Is it art, language, heritage, or all at once? On Gomera, few care to untangle the threads. They simply live them. At a nearby cafe, you meet Lucia, a young tour guide. Visitors love hearing Silbo, she says, but more they love knowing it still matters here. She explains that guided hikes now include Silbo demonstrations. Festivals feature whistling performances. Even weddings sometimes begin with whistled vows, an old tradition finding new voice. Yet beneath the tourist appeal lies something deeper. For us, Lucia says, it's not a show. It's family, memory. Later, wandering narrow lanes, you hear it again, a casual exchange between two friends across rooftops. A joke perhaps, or an invitation to lunch. No stage, no audience, just Silbo living. You pause smiling. Here on this rugged isle where cliffs divide and winds weave the language of breath and stone binds past to present. And as you walk on, each whistle feels like a thread, a fragile, shining link in Gomera's unbroken song. Another sunlit morning finds you meandering through the high pastures above Hermigua, where terraces climb the hills like ancient steps. Miguel promised today's outing would reveal Silbo's more unexpected side. At a rambling goat farm, you're greeted by Maria, a shepherd, with a grin as wide as the ravine below. Come, she says, time to meet the best Silbo listeners on the island. You expect children. You get goats. Maria leads you among the bleeding herd, fingers poised. With a crisp whistle, she calls, and the animals respond, trotting toward her with eager familiarity. They know the sounds, she laughs. Not the words, of course, but the rhythm, the tone. She demonstrates one trill. Summons feeding time, another. Signals gathering, a sharp burst warns of danger. The goats evidently are fluent. Historians still argue how much of Silbo's animal use was intentional training versus incidental conditioning. Did shepherds consciously develop a parallel whistle code for their herds? Or did the animals simply adapt? Either way, the bond is clear. Maria chuckles. Sometimes they listen better than people. She shares a tale. One stormy night, a young goat strayed far up the ravine. Maria's father, too old to climb, whistled a gentle call from their porch. Hours later, through wind and rain, the goat returned, drawn by sound alone. You watch as Maria practices with her newest kids, their heads tilting at each rising phrase. The simplicity is beautiful. No wires, no screens, just breath and ear. Beyond goats, Silbo finds other quirky listeners. Miguel recounts stories of songbirds mimicking phrases of dogs responding to household calls. On this island, he grins, "You whistle first, then see who answers." Later, sitting beneath a fig tree, you try your own gentle call. To your delight, one curious goat ambles over. You laugh, reaching to scratch its ears. In that moment, surrounded by sunstone and soft breath, you glimpse something timeless. A language not limited by species or age, simply sound alive in the world. As the breeze stirs the leaves, a soft whistle floats by. Friend or goat, on La Gomera it hardly matters. You find yourself aboard a small ferry bound for Tenerife, La Gomera, receding into the mist behind you. But this journey isn't an end, it's an expansion. Miguel grins beside you. Silbo has cousins, he says. Time to meet them. Across the Canary Islands, traces of whistled speech linger like faded footprints. Though La Gomera's Silbo is the most famous and best preserved, it wasn't always alone. Your first stop is El Hierro, the smallest of the Canaries. Here, among volcanic slopes and stubborn pines, you meet Ana, a linguist documenting local oral traditions. El Hierro once had its own Silbo, she explains. Now mostly forgotten, but some elders remember. She takes you to meet Don Emilio, a wiry octogenarian whose eyes gleam at your curiosity. With a practiced breath, he whistles a lilting phrase, soft, subtle, unlike the bold arcs of Gomera. Historians still argue whether these island variants stem from a common Guanche root or arose independently. Migration, trade, and necessity surely played roles, weaving sound across sea and stone. In Tenerife, you hear echoes of another story. Though its whistled language faded faster, old tales speak of shepherds using calls to guide flocks through dense forests. A local musician even weaves ancient whistle patterns into modern song. La Palma offers yet another twist. Here, some farmers adapted basic whistling, not full language, but a signaling system still used in the vineyards today. A trill for tools, a sharp call for help. Each island's story is unique, yet a common thread runs through them all. Geography meets ingenuity, sound bridges, distance culture sings through breath. Miguel leans against the ferry railing, watching waves shimmer below. "We Gomerans kept ours strongest," he says softly, "but Silbo belongs to all these lands." As the boat turns homeward, you feel the web of connections across islands' centuries' lives. A language shaped by cliffs and carried by wind, shared yet singular. The sun sets in molten gold. Across the waves, a lone whistle rises, a fragile thread between shores, between voices, between hearts. And you now are listening. Back on La Gomera, the days feel richer now, as though each breeze carries hidden words. Yet Miguel insists the story isn't finished. Silbo isn't alone, he says one morning. Around the world, others speak with whistles too. Over thick coffee and slices of queso blanco, he unrolls a world map finger tracing distant lands. Greece, Turkey, the Amazon, even the Pyrenees. Where the land divides, whistles rise. You start with Greece. In the remote village of Antio on Evia Island, shepherds developed a whistled form of Greek called spheria. Like Silbo, it compresses speech into sound, but here it snakes through dense forests and steep gorges. Miguel grins. I visited once. The old women there whistle as sharply as any man. In Turkey's mountainous Black Sea region, you learn of Kustili, the bird language. Here, villagers once relied on whistles to bridge tea plantations and rugged slopes. Though fading fast, efforts now mirror La Gomera's revival school programs, festivals, even UNESCO recognition. Historians still argue whether these whistled languages evolved independently or share ancient roots. Some suggest a universal pattern: when terrain silences voice, humans shape sound to suit it. Across the map, Miguel points to Amazonian tribes who use whistles for hunting and signaling. In the Pyrenees Basque, shepherds once guided flocks with melodic calls rich in nuance. The impulse is the same, Miguel says. Wherever cliffs or trees divide, breath finds a way. You marvel at the diversity. In each place, whistling adapts to language, landscape, and need. In Greece, the tones mimic Greek's rich vowels. In Turkey, sharp trills suit quick messages. In La Gomera, Silbo mirrors Spanish, but perhaps still sings with Guanche echoes. Later, walking a windswept ridge, you hear a familiar phrase, two shepherds exchanging news across a ravine. The sound carries timeless weight. You smile, thinking of distant cousins' voices in Greek gorges, Turkish tea fields, Andean peaks, Amazon rivers, threads of breath spun across the world. And here on this small island of cliffs and song, you stand among them, ears open, heart tuned to the wind. Another morning, another climb, this time to a quiet terrace where a group of visiting linguists gather. Miguel waves you over. Time to hear the debates, he says with a wink. You settle in as the scholars begin, coffee cups in hand. Voices lively. The question on the table: can a whistled language truly preserve full linguistic nuance? Dr. Reyes, a soft-spoken phonetician, starts. Silbo conveys incredible information, names, places, complex phrases. But some subtleties, tone of voice, emotional shading, those may be lost. Across the circle, Dr. Ahmed counters. Yet users adapt. Context fills gaps. And skilled whistlers convey more than we think through rhythm, pitch, modulation, timing. They cite studies where native Silbo speakers correctly identified subtle differences, questions versus statements, urgency versus calm. The line between sound and meaning blurs beautifully. Historians still argue about Silbo's limits. Is it a full language mode or a reduced speech surrogate? Can poetry survive in it? Political debate. Intimate conversation. Miguel chimes in. Once heard a man whistle an entire argument with his wife, he says, grinning. No nuance lost there. Laughter ripples through the group. Dr. Reyes shares an experiment where bilingual children conveyed riddles and jokes in Silbo with remarkable clarity. It forces precision, she notes. You choose words that sing through the air. Dr. Ahmed nods. It also fosters creativity. You think about language differently when breath carries it. As the sun climbs, the discussion deepens into linguistics, cognition, cultural pride. Yet a shared truth emerges. While Silbo may compress speech, it expands connection. In the act of whistling, speakers engage with language, landscape, and listener in uniquely rich ways. Later, you climb a ridge alone. The wind whispers past as if joining the debate. You try a simple phrase, your name drawn in sound. The reply floats back warm and clear. In that moment, nuance feels abundant, woven through pitch, pause, and shared breath. On the Gomera, you realize meaning rides not only on words, but on the song between them. Another dawn, another winding path, but this morning carries a quieter weight. Miguel walks beside you, his gaze distant. Even the strongest winds can fade, he says softly. Silbo faces new dangers. You pause beneath a gnarled laurel tree listening. No whistles drift through the air, just the rustle of leaves. Miguel explains. As life modernizes, languages shrink, he says. Phones reach every village. Roads connect once isolated farms. The need for Silbo lessens. Historians still argue how fast this decline is unfolding. Some believe the school programs and festivals will safeguard Silbo for generations. Others warn that without daily practical use, it may become museum-speak, preserved but unlived. Miguel shares a deeper concern. Younger Gomerans love learning Silbo, he says, but few use it beyond class. Without real-life need, mastery fades. Globalization accelerates this shift. Tourism brings opportunity, but also foreign tongues. Mass media drowns local sounds in a sea of content. Even our hills, Miguel says, hear more pop music now than whistles. Yet sparks of hope remain. Community leaders explore new roles for Silbo, guiding eco-tours, enriching cultural events, even integrating it into theater and song. And some families still teach it at home, not as a relic, but as a living art. As you hike higher, Miguel whistles a long rising phrase. The reply when it comes is youthful, sharp, bright, playful. A student, he smiles, still practicing. You realize that for Silbo to thrive, it must remain more than performance. It must breathe through daily life, calling goats, sharing gossip, flirting across fields. The island's heart beats strongest when voices rise in unbroken air. Later, at a small village cafe, you ask a young couple why they still whistle. The girl grins. Because we can, she says simply, and because when we do, we remember who we are. As twilight settles, a single call arcs across the ravine, a fragile defiance against forgetting. And beneath the gathering stars, you vow to remember too. A crisp morning finds you back at the school where you first watched children master Silbo. Today, Miguel says you'll meet some of its most passionate young voices. Inside a bright classroom, a group of teenagers gather, lively, confident. At their center stands Clara, a 16-year-old whose piercing whistle you remember from the contest. We want to keep it alive, she says simply. Not just for tourists, not for grades, for us. The group practices daily beyond class in their free time across town squares and mountain trails. They've even formed a club, Los Silbadores Jóvenes. Clara explains why. Phones are easy, but Silbo connects us to this place, to our grandparents, to the cliffs and wind. Her friend Danny grins. And it's fun. You can say things no one else hears. Historians still argue whether such revival efforts will sustain Silbo long-term. Will a language born of necessity survive as art as pride? Some doubt it. Others see hope in youth like Clara and Danny. You ask what motivates them. Clara gestures to a faded photo on the wall, her great-grandfather, a famed whistler. He crossed valleys with his voice. I want to do the same. They teach you a simple phrase. You try awkward, breathy, but improving. The group cheers. You'll get it, Danny says. Later, they take you to a favorite practice spot, a sunlit ridge where a sound soars. Here they play Silbo games, guessing phrases, composing songs, even whistling poems. Clara's eyes shine. We make Silbo ours. That's how it will live. As you watch them, young voices shaping ancient breath, you feel a quiet joy. The language is not frozen in glass. It moves, adapts, sings anew. That evening, from your window, you hear them still bright calls weaving through the dusk. The next generation is speaking, and the hills as ever are listening. By now, your ears catch every nuance, the sharp call of a warning, the lilting arc of a greeting, the slow, mournful fall of farewell. Yet there's one group whose Silbo holds a different kind of depth. Miguel leads you to a shaded courtyard where elder islanders gather a circle of well-worn chairs, a thermos of strong coffee, a breeze heavy with memory. They remember life when Silbo wasn't a curiosity, Miguel whispers. It was survival. You settle among them as Don Felipe, his voice roughened by age, begins to speak. When I was a boy, he says, there were no phones, no buses, no fast roads. The air carried our words. He tells of days spent in the fields when a single whistle called a father home to a birth or a funeral. Of market mornings when farmers negotiated prices from opposite cliffs. Of nights when lovers whispered through the stars. Historians still argue how universally fluent older islanders once were. Some claim entire communities could speak Silbo as easily as Spanish. Others suggest it was always a skill of the few. Among these elders, though, fluency is unquestioned. Maria, her eyes gleaming, shares her own story. When my brother fell from the olive tree, we had no way to fetch help except Silbo. The doctor heard us 2 valleys away. Another elder laughed softly. And when the priest came too, often we whistled the warning so the wine could be hidden. The circle erupts in knowing chuckles. You ask what they think of Silbo's future. Felipe smiles bittersweet. It will not be what we knew, but if it breathes, that is enough. They teach you a parting phrase, a blessing of sorts carried in breath. May your voice find the wind. As you walk away, the phrase lingers, then rises as one of them whistles it gently after you. In that echo, you hear not just words, but generations still speaking, still heard. Clouds gather on the horizon, heavy with the promise of rain. Miguel grins. Perfect night, he says, to learn Silbo's true power. You follow him through twisting paths to a high outpost, a weathered stone hut perched where cliffs meet sky. The wind howls, the first drops fall. This was my grandfather's post, Miguel explains. On nights like this, he'd stand watch for storm, for danger, for lost souls. Inside, you light a lantern. The air thrums with tension. Miguel steps out into the storm, fingers ready. Watch, he says. A long rising whistle pierces the darkness, steady, unwavering. Moments later, a distant reply echoes through rain and wind. Not just heard, felt. Sound travels farther when the air is heavy, Miguel explains. But it also distorts. You must choose your pitch, your timing. Historians still argue whether ancient whistlers adjusted their technique for weather. Some claim special storm phrases existed. Others suggest instinct guided them. Tonight, instinct reigns. You step outside, the rain slants sideways, breath, shallow fingers, cold you try. The first call vanishes. The second, clearer. Miguel whistles back a simple message. We are safe, we are here. And the answer returns high, sure, comforting. In this moment, language bridges not just distance, but fear. Miguel tells of storms past shepherds calling lost goats through the gale, mothers reassuring children stranded across ravines. Silbo was the rope between us, he says, when nothing else held. The wind roars louder. Another call rises, this one urgent. Miguel listens, then laughs. Our friend Jose worried about his tomatoes. Even amid storm and time, the island sings. Later, as rain hammers the roof, you sit by the flickering lamp. Miguel hands you a battered notebook, his grandfather's. Inside, not words, but whistle patterns drawn in careful lines. A legacy in breath. You fall asleep to the sound of wind and distant calls, ancient, human, unbroken. Dawn breaks cold and clear, the storm spent. The air hangs crisp, perfect for sound. Miguel meets you with a thoughtful look. Today, he says, we cross time. You hike together to a high plateau where ruins of ancient terraces sprawl across the landscape, stone walls veined with moss, their builders long gone. Here Miguel says the Guanches once farmed, and here some say their voices still echo. You sit amid the stones as he recounts a local tale. One night long ago, a young Guanche woman waited here for her love captured by Spanish soldiers. Each dusk, she whistled the same haunting phrase across the ravine. They say her call still floats here on certain nights, Miguel murmurs. Historians still argue whether such stories preserve literal memory or poetic truth. Yet even skeptics acknowledge this sound lingers. In landscapes where breath shaped meaning for centuries, echoes become more than physics. Miguel demonstrates sending a slow, mournful call through the still air. It seems to hang between the stones, each note wrapped in time. You try your own phrase, awkward, unsure. The ravine answers with silence, then faintly a distant whistle responds. Miguel smiles. Jose again, he says. But in that moment, you were connected across distance, across time. You walk the plateau imagining voices from long ago, farmers, coordinating work lovers, exchanging secret vows, warriors warning of danger. Each breath woven into wind and stone. Later at a small museum, you see ancient bone flutes carved long before written language reached these shores. The impulse is clear to shape air into meaning, to send self into space. As twilight falls, you return alone. On the plateau beneath a sky streaked with stars, you send one last call, a simple greeting carried on the wind. The reply comes soft and slow. Maybe Jose, maybe memory. You smile. Some messages need no sender to matter. Morning light slants across the hills as you meet Miguel near the school. You've listened well, he says. Now one final lesson. You follow him through winding streets to a modest home. There waits Don Salvador, a master whistler, well into his 80s, sharp-eyed and quick-witted. Today, Miguel grins, he teaches you. Don Salvador appraises you. Your ear is good, he says. Now your breath will see. You begin with basics, vowels and clear pitches, consonants shaped by rhythm. Don Salvador whistles each phrase. You echo it back, clumsy at first, then slowly steadier. Historians still argue about whether outsiders can truly master Silbo. Some claim fluency requires childhood immersion. Others believe dedication and ear suffice. You resolve to test the question yourself. The old master pushes you further. Complex sentences, subtle pauses, playful tones. Your lips ache, your breath runs thin. Yet with each attempt, something shifts. A breakthrough comes with a phrase of gratitude, 4 notes, a rising arc. Your first clear, confident call. Don Salvador nods. Now you speak. The lesson deepens. He teaches you a parting blessing, an old shepherd's phrase. May the wind carry your words where feet cannot tread. You practice until the sun dips low, the hills glowing gold. Afterward, over coffee, Don Salvador reflects. Silbo is more than sound, he says softly. It is patience, breath, listening. He tells of nights spent whistling to stars of dawns when the first call broke across silent fields. Each whistle, he says, carries all who came before. You leave with thanks and new resolve. Later, alone on a high ridge, you try once more. The phrase arcs true into the fading light. A distant reply floats back clear, warm. You smile. Not perfect, not fluent, but part of the conversation now. And as you descend, the hills seem to hum with quiet approval. Your last full day on La Gomera dawns bright and wind-kissed. Miguel greets you with a knowing smile. Time for your final call, he says. You hike together to a favorite spot, a secluded ridge overlooking a vast barranco. Below, terraces tumble toward the sea. Above, clouds drift like slow ships. Here, Miguel says softly, masters send their parting messages. You watch as Don Salvador arrives, staff in hand. Clara and Danny from the youth group join, two faces eager. The circle forms a bridge between generations. Miguel explains, we send one last call not to a person but to the land, to all who listen. Historians still argue whether this tradition stems from Guanche rites or later shepherd customs. Some call it ritual, others simple farewell. For those gathered here, it is sacred. The master begins low, deliberate notes rising like mist. Clara answers bright, clear, young. Danny follows playful weaving tones. Miguel's call rings steady and strong. Then they turn to you. Breath slow, fingers poised, you shape the phrase Don Salvador taught. May the wind carry your words where feet cannot tread. The whistle arcs upward, pure, uncertain, yet yours. A pause. Then the group replies as one, their voices braiding through the air. For a moment, time blurs. You feel connected not just to those present, but to centuries of breath in stone and wind. As the calls fade, silence settles, a fullness, not a void. Later, the group shares a meal bread cheese stories. Laughter mingles with soft, casual whistles. No performance, just life. At sunset, you climb alone to a final overlook. The sea gleams copper, the sky deepens to indigo. You whistle one last phrase, farewell, gratitude, promise. The reply comes faint and sure. You smile. You will carry this language with you not as a trick or curiosity, but as a way of listening, of speaking, of being. As darkness falls, the hills whisper in reply. You are part of the song now. Your last morning on Gomera arrives softly as if the island itself wishes not to wake you too soon. You step out early, the village still hushed streets slick with dew. In the distance, a faint whistle stirs the air, someone already greeting the day. Your ferry leaves in a few hours. Miguel meets you by the old plaza. One last thing he says with a smile. You've learned to whistle. Now listen. You walk together through the waking town. A shopkeeper whistles a short phrase to her neighbor. A child responds from a balcony above. Across the square, two old men exchange a call as natural as breath. Miguel explains Silbo is not trapped in stone or school books. It lives here in simple moments. You wander up to a ridge, your final view of the island. Below, ravines stretch like green ribbons. Above, swifts dart through rising air. And then a master whistler arrives, Don Salvador again, smiling staff in hand. Without a word, he faces the wind. The call he sends is slow, rich, unhurried, a message not just across distance, but through time. Each note lingers, drifts, fades. You feel it settle into the land itself. One by one, Clara, Danny, even Miguel reply, layering voices on the wind. Finally, they gesture to you. You take a breath, shaping your farewell. Your whistle rises imperfect but true. No words needed. The reply comes warm and sure. Historians still argue whether such partings are ritual or habit. But standing here, you know this is connection woven through place and breath. Later, as the ferry pulls away, the island recedes, cliffs softened by haze, terraces kissed by sun. A faint call reaches you across the waves, impossible perhaps, yet you hear it. And within you, something answers. Now as you rest, let your breath slow. Feel the air around you, gentle, patient. The winds of Gomera still whisper, carrying stories across stone and sea. Close your eyes and imagine those ancient terraces, green and bright beneath the sun. Hear the distant call of a shepherd guiding goats, the playful trill of children, trading secrets across rooftops, the soft farewell of lovers through starlight. Breathe in slow, deep. Let each breath carry a thread of this timeless song. Picture the master whistlers on the high ridge, their calls rising like prayer, like promise. Feel how each note rides the air, not rushed, not forced, simply present. Now let those sounds fade into the breeze, softer, slower, until only a faint hum remains. Know that across the world, others still shape breath into meaning. On cliffs in Greece, in the forests of Turkey, in hidden corners of the Amazon, voices still rise on the wind. And perhaps when you next hear the breeze stirring leaves, or whistling through a narrow street, you'll remember. You'll listen. Let the island drift now, Gomera, resting beneath its stars, its language safe in voices yet to speak. You are part of that song. Carry it gently. Now sleep, dear listener. The winds will keep watch.